The easiest way to lose your heart is to rent it to someone who was never supposed to stay. Charlotte Bennett had built an empire by making decisions faster than everyone else in the room. Billion-dollar acquisitions, international expansions, crisis management. None of it scared her anymore. Yet as she stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse, staring at the lights scattered across the city below, she felt something she hated. Desperation. The media storm surrounding her company had grown worse every week. Investors were asking questions. Reporters were creating stories. Competitors were smiling behind closed doors. The board wanted stability. The public wanted a narrative. Her advisors wanted a family image. A believable one. Charlotte folded her arms and looked toward the man sitting across from her marble table. Marcus Reed looked completely out of place in a room worth more than most neighborhoods. His dark Henley shirt was simple. His jeans were worn but clean. He sat calmly, not impressed by the skyline, the artwork, or the luxury surrounding him. That alone made him different from almost everyone Charlotte knew. A thick contract rested between them. $5 million. 1 year. Public appearances. Family events. A carefully constructed image. Charlotte slid the contract toward him. $5 million, she said quietly. For 1 year. Marcus glanced down at the document. Then he read it. Every page. Every paragraph. Every condition. Charlotte watched him. Most people never made it past the number on the first page. Marcus reached the final page. The room became silent. Outside, helicopters crossed the dark sky. Inside, the city seemed very far away. Charlotte expected questions. Negotiations. A larger demand. Instead, Marcus slowly closed the contract and pushed it back toward her. No. Charlotte blinked. For a moment she thought she had misunderstood him. No. Marcus nodded once. No. She stared at him. You just turned down $5 million. Yes. Do you know how many people would take this deal? Probably a lot. His calm voice somehow made the rejection worse. Charlotte leaned forward. Then why are you saying no? Marcus looked away briefly. Not toward the contract. Not toward the money. Toward a worn leather wallet resting near his hand. As he picked it up, a small photograph slipped partially into view. Charlotte caught a glimpse of a smiling little girl with bright eyes and curly hair. The expression on Marcus's face changed instantly. Softer. Warmer. Protective. He carefully placed the photograph back inside. Because my daughter is not part of a business strategy, he said. The words landed harder than Charlotte expected. She looked at him for several seconds without speaking. Most people saw opportunity when they looked at her. Marcus saw a problem. For the first time in years, Charlotte did not know what to say. Marcus stood and prepared to leave. The meeting was over. The deal was dead. Yet as he reached the penthouse door, Charlotte found herself watching that photograph instead of the contract. And for reasons she could not explain, she suddenly wanted to know more about the little girl who had just cost her the easiest solution money could buy. The next morning, Charlotte told herself she had forgotten about Marcus Reed. She repeated it twice while reviewing financial reports. 3 times while sitting through a board meeting. 4 times while signing documents worth more money than most people would see in a lifetime. By noon, she knew she was lying to herself. It was not Marcus she kept thinking about. It was the photograph. The way his entire expression had changed when he looked at his daughter. Charlotte had spent years studying people. Investors. Competitors. Politicians. She knew how to recognize ambition. Fear. Greed. But what she had seen in Marcus's eyes was different. It was love without calculation. And somehow that stayed with her. Late that afternoon, Charlotte arrived at a community event sponsored by her foundation. The program supported public schools throughout the city. Normally, she would make an appearance, shake hands, smile for photographs, and leave within 20 minutes. Today felt different. Children ran across the playground carrying colorful art projects while parents gathered beneath temporary tents. Charlotte adjusted the sleeve of her white cashmere coat and prepared for another predictable event. Then she saw him. Marcus stood near a picnic table helping a little girl attach a ribbon to a science project display. He looked exactly the same as he had the night before. Calm, patient, focused entirely on the child beside him. Charlotte immediately recognized the little girl from the photograph. Ava Reed. She was even brighter in person. Her smile seemed to light up the entire area around her. Marcus noticed Charlotte a second later. Surprise crossed his face before he quickly hid it. Charlotte offered a polite nod. Marcus returned it. Neither of them moved closer. Neither seemed eager to repeat their conversation from the previous evening. Then Ava noticed Charlotte. The little girl looked from her father to Charlotte and back again. Curiosity appeared instantly. Before Marcus could stop her, Ava walked directly toward Charlotte. "Hi," Ava said cheerfully. Charlotte smiled despite herself. "Hi." Ava tilted her head. "You are the lady from television." Charlotte laughed softly. "Sometimes." Ava studied her for several seconds with the kind of fearless honesty only children possess. Then she asked a question no executive, journalist, or investor had ever asked. "Why do you look sad if you are rich?" The world seemed to pause. Nearby conversations faded into the background. Charlotte blinked. For a moment she honestly thought she had misheard. Ava waited patiently. Marcus looked horrified. "Ava," he said gently, "that is not something you ask people." But Charlotte raised a hand. "It is okay." She looked down at the little girl. The question should have been easy to dismiss. Instead it settled somewhere deep inside her. Why did she look sad? Charlotte searched for an answer and found none. Not one she wanted to say aloud. Ava continued watching her. Not judging. Not criticizing. Just waiting. Charlotte finally smiled, though it felt fragile. Maybe because money does not fix everything. Ava nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she reached for her father's hand and walked away. Charlotte remained standing there long after they left. And for the first time in years, the billionaire who always had an answer found herself haunted by a simple question from a child. 3 days later, Charlotte was sitting at the head of a conference table while 12 executives argued around her. Charts covered the screens. Numbers filled the room. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted certainty. Charlotte listened without speaking. Her attention drifted toward the rain sliding down the windows 30 floors above Manhattan. She kept hearing the same question. Why do you look sad if you are rich? It was ridiculous. A child should not have been able to disrupt her thoughts this much. Yet the question followed her everywhere. Her assistant quietly entered the room and placed a tablet beside her. Charlotte glanced at the screen. Another article. Another headline. Another story questioning her personal life. The board members noticed her expression immediately. One of them cleared his throat. "We need a stronger public image." Another nodded. "The market responds to stability." A third executive leaned forward. "People trust families. They trust relationships. They trust connection." Charlotte already knew where the conversation was going. She had heard it for months. Normally, she would have dismissed it. This time, she remained silent. That evening, she stood alone in her penthouse kitchen. The city lights reflected across the glass walls. The apartment was beautiful, perfect, expensive, and painfully quiet. No laughter, no conversation, no footsteps, just silence. Her phone rang. It was her public relations director. "The situation is getting worse," he said carefully. "We need something real." Charlotte laughed softly. "Real? Something people believe." She ended the call a few minutes later and walked toward the balcony. For the first time, she admitted something she had spent years avoiding. She was tired. Tired of performing. Tired of pretending success solved loneliness. Tired of returning every night to rooms that felt larger than necessary. Her eyes drifted toward the city below. Somewhere out there was a man who had turned down $5 million without hesitation. A man who seemed richer than most billionaires she knew. The next afternoon, Charlotte found herself standing outside Marcus Reed's house. It was a modest home on a quiet street lined with trees. Nothing about it was impressive. Yet children rode bicycles nearby. Neighbors waved at one another. Someone was grilling dinner a few houses away. Life felt present here. Real. Charlotte sat inside her car for several moments before finally walking to the front door. When Marcus opened it, surprise crossed his face. "Charlotte." She nodded. "Can we talk?" Marcus stepped outside and closed the door behind him. He wore a simple gray shirt and looked as calm as ever. Charlotte suddenly forgot the speech she had prepared. The practiced arguments disappeared. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "You are not here about the contract." Charlotte looked at him. "No." "Then why are you here?" She took a slow breath. For the first time in a very long time, she decided not to hide behind business language. "Because I am running out of ways to fix this." Marcus remained quiet. Charlotte looked away briefly. "And because I think you already know that." Something changed in his expression. Not sympathy. Understanding. The kind that made her feel unexpectedly exposed. Before either of them could continue, the front door opened. Ava stepped outside carrying a sketchbook. Her face immediately brightened when she saw Charlotte. "You came back." Charlotte smiled despite herself. Ava grinned. Marcus looked between them, and for reasons none of them fully understood yet, the future suddenly felt much less certain than it had that morning. For the next 2 weeks, everything moved faster than Charlotte expected. The agreement was finally signed, but it no longer felt like a business arrangement. It felt like stepping into a life she did not fully understand. The first public appearance happened at a weekend community fundraiser. Reporters took photographs. Cameras followed them. Marcus stood beside her, calm and steady, while Ava happily held both of their hands as if nothing about the situation was unusual. Charlotte had spent years attending events surrounded by executives and investors. Yet standing beside a man in a simple polo shirt and a smiling little girl felt strangely more difficult than speaking to a room full of shareholders. Later that afternoon, they stopped at a grocery store because Ava wanted ingredients for homemade pizza. Charlotte pushed a shopping cart for the first time in years. She immediately chose the wrong items. Ava laughed. Marcus laughed. Even Charlotte laughed. The sound surprised her. It felt unfamiliar, warm, real. That evening they returned to Marcus's house. The kitchen became a disaster within minutes. Flour covered part of the counter. Cheese ended up where it was not supposed to be. Ava declared herself the official supervisor and took her responsibilities very seriously. Marcus patiently corrected Charlotte every time she made a mistake. "That is too much sauce. That is not how you hold the pizza cutter. You are making this much harder than it needs to be." Charlotte rolled her eyes. "I run a billion-dollar company." Marcus smiled. "And yet you lost an argument with pizza dough." Ava nearly fell off her chair laughing. Charlotte found herself laughing too. Later, after dinner, the three of them sat in the living room while Ava worked on homework. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The television played quietly in the background. Nothing important was happening. No major decisions. No negotiations. No meetings. Just an ordinary evening. Charlotte watched Marcus help Ava solve a math problem. His voice remained patient even when she made the same mistake 3 times. He never rushed her. Never sounded frustrated. Something inside Charlotte tightened unexpectedly. She could not remember anyone speaking to her with that kind of patience when she was young. The realization stayed with her. Eventually, Ava finished her homework and disappeared upstairs. Silence settled across the room. Marcus gathered empty plates from the coffee table. Charlotte helped without thinking. Their hands brushed briefly while reaching for the same glass. Neither spoke. The moment passed quickly, yet something lingered. Marcus carried the dishes into the kitchen. Charlotte followed. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus looked surprised. "For what?" Charlotte glanced toward the staircase where Ava had disappeared. "For letting me be here." Marcus studied her for a second. "You are helping me too." Charlotte wanted to ask how. She wanted to understand why this house already felt less lonely than her penthouse. But before she could speak, her phone lit up on the counter. Another headline. Another article. Another reminder of the world waiting outside these walls. Marcus noticed the expression on her face. Charlotte locked the screen immediately. Yet for the first time, she realized she was disappointed that reality had found her again. Over the following month, the arrangement settled into something that felt dangerously comfortable. Charlotte still attended board meetings, investor calls, and public events, but more and more often she found herself looking forward to the end of the day. Not because of her penthouse, not because of her success, because of a small house on a quiet street where people actually seemed happy to see her. One Saturday morning, Ava convinced both adults to spend the day at a neighborhood farmer's market. Charlotte arrived wearing a simple white sweater and jeans. Marcus immediately noticed. "You look different." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" Marcus smiled. "It means you do not look like you are about to acquire a company." Ava laughed and grabbed Charlotte's hand before she could respond. The morning passed with surprising ease. They sampled fresh fruit, listened to a local musician, and watched Ava spend 10 minutes deciding between 2 handmade bracelets. Charlotte realized something unusual. Nobody here cared who she was. Nobody asked about stock prices. Nobody wanted favors. She was simply another adult helping a child choose a bracelet. The feeling was strangely freeing. Later that afternoon, they returned home, carrying groceries. Ava disappeared upstairs to work on a school project, while Marcus began unpacking food in the kitchen. Charlotte joined him. The routine felt natural now, almost automatic. She placed vegetables in the refrigerator while Marcus organized the pantry. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Eventually, Marcus looked over. "You seem happier lately." Charlotte paused. The question caught her off guard. Most people notice performance. Marcus noticed emotion. "Maybe," she admitted quietly. Marcus nodded. "Ava notices it too." Something warm settled in Charlotte's chest. She looked toward the staircase. "She is a remarkable kid." Marcus smiled softly. "She is the best thing that ever happened to me." Charlotte believed him immediately. That evening, after dinner, Ava spread photographs across the living room floor for a school assignment about family memories. Charlotte sat beside her. Marcus remained nearby reading documents for work. Ava pointed to different pictures and shared stories connected to each one. Camping trips, birthday parties, school plays, simple moments, important moments. Then Ava suddenly picked up a blank page. "I need one more picture," she announced. Charlotte laughed. "Of what?" Ava looked directly at her. "Of us." The room became very quiet. Marcus slowly lowered the papers in his hands. Charlotte felt her heartbeat change. Ava continued speaking without realizing the effect of her words. "Because you are in all the new memories." Charlotte looked down at the photographs scattered across the floor. For a second, she could not speak. Nobody had included her in family memories before. Nobody had ever expected her to belong somewhere. Marcus met her eyes from across the room. Neither said anything. Neither needed to. Yet later that night, long after she returned to her penthouse, Charlotte found herself staring at a photograph Ava had insisted she take home. And for the first time, she began wondering what would happen when all of this eventually ended. The photograph Ava had given her remained on Charlotte's desk for days. She told herself she should put it away. It did not belong among quarterly reports and acquisition proposals. Yet every morning, she found herself looking at it before opening a single email. Ava stood in the center of the picture, smiling proudly, while Marcus stood beside her with one hand resting on her shoulder. Charlotte was standing on Ava's other side. Looking at it now, she realized something strange. She looked genuinely happy. Not polished, not professional. Happy. The realization unsettled her more than any business crisis ever had. A week later, Charlotte attended one of Ava's school events. The auditorium was crowded with parents carrying flowers and cameras. Children moved nervously behind the stage curtain. Charlotte arrived directly from a board meeting, still wearing a tailored white blazer. The moment Ava spotted her, her face lit up. She immediately ran over and wrapped her arms around Charlotte. "You came." Charlotte smiled. "Of course I came." The words left her mouth before she thought about them. Yet they felt true. Ava hurried backstage while Charlotte found a seat beside Marcus. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Marcus quietly said, "You did not have to leave work for this." Charlotte kept her eyes on the stage. "I wanted to." Marcus looked at her for a moment, but did not respond. Something about his silence felt meaningful. The performance lasted less than an hour. Ava sang with her class, missed one line, laughed at herself, and kept going. The audience loved her. Charlotte found herself applauding harder than anyone. Later, while parents and children gathered in the hallway, Ava introduced Charlotte to several classmates. The little girl spoke with complete confidence. "This is Charlotte." One child asked, "Is she your aunt?" Ava thought for a second. Then she simply shrugged. "She is Charlotte." The answer somehow felt more important than any title. That evening, the three of them stopped for dinner at a small family restaurant. Rain tapped against the windows while people filled booths around them. Ava spent most of the meal talking about school, books, and a science project she was determined to win. Marcus listened patiently. Charlotte listened too. The conversation felt effortless, natural, comfortable. Halfway through dessert, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. The expression on his face changed almost immediately. It was subtle, but Charlotte noticed. Marcus quickly locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Ava continued talking without noticing anything unusual. Charlotte remained quiet. Later, after Ava had gone to the restroom, Charlotte finally asked, "Everything okay?" Marcus hesitated. "Just work." Charlotte studied him. She knew when people were avoiding the truth. She had spent years surrounded by executives who treated honesty like a negotiable concept. Marcus looked away briefly. Nothing important. Charlotte wanted to believe him. Instead, a small feeling of concern settled inside her. Because for the first time, she realized Marcus had become important enough for his problems to matter to her. and that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. The feeling stayed with Charlotte for days. Marcus had said nothing was wrong, yet she could not forget the expression on his face when he looked at that message. It had not been fear. It had not been anger. It had looked more like resignation, as if he had already made a decision he did not want to make. Charlotte tried to focus on work. Unfortunately, work seemed less important than it once had. During meetings, she found herself wondering whether Ava had finished her science project. While reviewing contracts, she caught herself remembering conversations around Marcus's dinner table. The shift unsettled her. For years her life had revolved around business. Now something else was quietly taking up space in her heart. One Friday afternoon, Charlotte arrived at Marcus's house carrying a small bag of supplies Ava needed for school. She knocked once before letting herself in. The arrangement had reached that point naturally. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She walked toward the kitchen and stopped. Several cardboard boxes sat near the hallway. At first she assumed they were old storage containers. Then she noticed shipping labels attached to the sides. Charlotte's stomach tightened. Before she could look closer, Marcus entered from another room. The moment he saw her standing beside the boxes, his expression changed. Silence settled between them. Neither spoke immediately. Charlotte looked at the labels again. One city name stood out clearly. Chicago. Hundreds of miles away. She slowly turned toward him. What is this? Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. The gesture looked unusually nervous for someone normally so calm. It is nothing. Charlotte laughed softly. There was no humor in the sound. Those boxes do not look like nothing. Marcus remained silent. That silence told her everything. Charlotte felt something heavy settle inside her chest. You are leaving. It was not a question. Marcus looked down briefly before meeting her eyes. I was going to tell you. Charlotte folded her arms. When? Another silence. Longer this time. More painful. Marcus finally spoke. A company in Chicago offered me a position a few weeks ago. Charlotte stared at him. A few weeks ago, while they had been sharing dinners, school events, ordinary evenings. He had already been planning a future somewhere else. You accepted? Marcus nodded once. Charlotte looked away. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The walls felt closer. She hated the feeling rising inside her because it made no logical sense. This was temporary. It had always been temporary. Yet the thought of Marcus and Ava leaving hurt more than she wanted to admit. Upstairs, a door opened. Ava's footsteps echoed down the hallway. Neither adult moved. Neither seemed prepared for the conversation waiting ahead. Ava entered carrying a notebook and immediately sensed the tension. Her smile faded slightly. She looked from Charlotte to Marcus. What happened? Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. Charlotte looked at the little girl and forced herself to smile. But for the first time since entering their lives, the smile did not reach her eyes. And Ava noticed. Ava noticed because Ava always noticed. The little girl looked from Charlotte's face to the boxes in the hallway, and then to Marcus. Nobody needed to explain anything. Children often understood more than adults realized. The cheerful energy that usually followed Ava seemed to disappear for a moment. What is going on? She asked quietly. Marcus took a slow breath. Sweetheart, we were going to talk about it soon. Ava looked at the boxes again. Talk about what? Charlotte wished she could leave. She wished she had never walked into the house that afternoon. Instead, she remained standing there, feeling strangely helpless. Marcus knelt beside his daughter. A company in Chicago offered me a job. Ava blinked. Chicago? Marcus nodded. Yes. Far away Chicago. The question broke something inside Charlotte because of how small Ava suddenly sounded. Marcus smiled gently. Yes. That's Chicago. Ava looked down at the floor. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly walked upstairs carrying her notebook. The silence she left behind felt heavier than any argument. Charlotte stared at the staircase long after Ava disappeared. Eventually, she picked up her purse. I should go. Marcus looked exhausted. Older somehow. Charlotte. She stopped, but did not turn around immediately. You should have told me. Her voice remained calm. That surprised even her. Marcus looked toward the boxes. I wanted to, but you did not. Another silence settled between them. Marcus finally spoke. Because I knew it would hurt. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. The honesty made everything worse. She left a few moments later and drove home through the evening rain. The city lights blurred against the windshield. For the first time in years, her penthouse felt exactly what it was. Empty. The following week passed slowly. Charlotte threw herself into work. Meetings filled her calendar. Investors filled her phone. Yet nothing distracted her for long. Every quiet moment led back to the same thought. Marcus was leaving. Ava was leaving. And soon the house that had somehow become part of her life would no longer belong to her at all. Then came the final weekend before the move. Charlotte almost did not go. She stood in her apartment for nearly 20 minutes debating whether to drive across the city. In the end, she went anyway. Some goodbyes deserve courage. When she arrived, the house looked different. More boxes. More empty spaces. More evidence that time was running out. Ava greeted her at the door and immediately wrapped her arms around her waist. Charlotte held her tightly. Longer than usual. The three of them spent the afternoon together. They played board games. Ordered takeout. Watched an old movie. Nobody mentioned Chicago. Nobody mentioned the future. They pretended the day was normal because the truth felt too painful. Evening arrived. Too quickly. Eventually Charlotte stood near the front door preparing to leave. Her coat was already on. Her keys were in her hand. Marcus stood a few feet away, watching quietly. Ava stepped forward. Her eyes looked unusually serious. Charlotte smiled softly. "I am going to miss you." Ava's lower lip trembled slightly. Then she moved closer and wrapped both arms around Charlotte's neck. Charlotte hugged her back. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ava whispered a single word. One simple word. One word so quiet it almost disappeared into the silence. "Mom." Everything stopped. Charlotte froze. Marcus froze. Even Ava seemed surprised by what she had said. And in that single moment, nothing about their lives felt temporary anymore. For several seconds, nobody moved. Ava remained wrapped around Charlotte's neck. Charlotte felt tears gathering before she could stop them. Not because of the word itself, but because of what it meant. It had not come from obligation. It had not come from a contract. It had come from a little girl who simply spoke the truth as she felt it. Ava slowly pulled back and looked up. Her eyes were worried now. "I am sorry," she whispered. Charlotte immediately shook her head. "No, sweetheart. Do not be sorry." Her voice trembled slightly. Ava studied her face. "Are you mad?" Charlotte laughed softly through the emotion. "Not even a little." Across the room, Marcus stood completely still. The calm man who always seemed to have an answer suddenly looked uncertain. Charlotte turned toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. Months earlier, they had been strangers sitting across a contract. Now they were standing inside a home that had somehow changed all of them. Ava quietly slipped away toward the living room, sensing this conversation belonged to the adults. Silence settled between them again. Marcus finally spoke first. "I never planned for any of this." Charlotte smiled sadly. "Neither did I." He looked toward the packed boxes lining the hallway. The job was supposed to solve everything. Charlotte followed his gaze. "Will it?" Marcus did not answer immediately. That answer told her enough. For months, he had focused on responsibility, stability, security, doing what seemed practical. But practical decisions were not always the right ones. Charlotte took a slow breath. "Do you actually want to leave?" Marcus looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "I thought I did." The honesty hung between them. Charlotte felt her heart beat faster. Not from uncertainty, from clarity. For the first time, neither of them was hiding behind obligations. Marcus glanced toward the living room where Ava was quietly drawing in her sketchbook. She got attached. Charlotte smiled gently. "So did I." The admission surprised both of them. Yet neither looked away. Outside, evening sunlight faded beyond the windows. Inside, the house felt warmer than ever. Marcus laughed softly. "You know, when you offered me that contract, I thought it would be the easiest decision in the world." Charlotte shook her head. "And now?" Marcus looked around the room. The photographs on the walls. Ava's drawings on the refrigerator. The life they had accidentally built together. "Now it feels impossible." Charlotte stepped closer. Not dramatically, just enough to remove the distance that had existed for too long. "Then maybe we stop making decisions based on what we are supposed to do." Marcus held her gaze. "And what do we do instead?" Charlotte smiled through tears. She no longer cared about hiding. "Maybe we choose what matters." A few seconds later, Ava appeared in the doorway again. She looked from Marcus to Charlotte. "Does this mean nobody is leaving?" Marcus laughed for the first time in days. Charlotte felt something inside her finally settle. Not excitement. Not relief. Something deeper. Belonging. Marcus opened his arms. Ava ran straight into them. Charlotte joined them a second later. The three of them stood together in the center of the room while the evening light filled the house. No reporters. No contracts. No negotiations. Just a man, a little girl, and a woman who had spent years searching for a place to belong. And at last, without realizing it, she had found her way home.